We saw what really happened. Death, chaos, and rage and mayhem, as we'll put it, was a day of infamy. And it is a silent moment for us in the country to take a reflection on what really happened yesterday. And so we want to delve deeper right now with our panelists holding court this morning with Dr. Hassan Kanenje, who is the director at the Horn Institute. Also, we have with us Professor Peter Kagwanja, CEO of Africa Policy Institute, and Professor Macharia Munene as well, a historian, Professor Emeritus of USIU. Professor Macharia, we were just on you as well, the last bit of it. I hope you've not lost your track of thoughts regarding just yesterday's event as well. And
yeah, and I think, I don't know whether I've lost completely the track, but I think I was going to
you were on your third point.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Because part of the reason we have this crisis, and it is a crisis, is the perception that the IMF and the World Bank are ruling this country. That they are the ones dictating, saying you must do this. Even if it makes no sense, you must do it. They are the ones who have insisted that you cut support for education, which has been run down completely. And they are the ones insisting that you cut down on health. And so when the impression comes that President Ruto and his team are not running the country, that it is the IMF and the World Bank that are running the country, not a very good picture, eh? Mm-hmm. So some of the things we are seeing are reactions to that perception, that the country has been surrendered to foreign entities. And if that is the case, then you have a long way to go. And the president and his team have a very big job of trying to convince the people, the country, that that is not the case. Yeah? Are you in charge really when you are getting orders from IMF and World Bank? Are you in charge when we hear da? So that's what I was trying to say, that the perception itself is that Kenya is not a free country because it is being run by some foreign entities that are giving orders. Mm-hmm. And the orders they are giving are detrimental to the welfare of the country, of the people themselves. That's why they are suffering. Mm-hmm. That's why students cannot go to universities anymore, and the teachers are suffering what Kenneth Ombogi was calling what? Pecuniary embarrassment. Eh? Mm-hmm. and the doctor, we have thousands of doctors who cannot be placed in hospitals mm-hmm. or health centers. These are policy anomalies. And it's got nothing to do with some problem somewhere else. Mm-hmm. These are internal problems because we have the wrong people making policies. Mm-hmm. And they're not even sure what it is that they're doing.
Right.
So the disconnect is something that needs to be looked at, even when trying to address
Thank you.
The children.
Thank you. Let's hear from Dr. Hassan Kanenje, because of course we have now the national security emergency situation and the gazettement that we saw that will now make sure there is a deployment of KDF on the ground. So as it is, we have Professor Macharia thinking that this particular deployment is premature, and what does it really showcase about our police force or security officers right now in regard to yesterday's? There were pronouncements that they should restrain. They should not really, of course, show the brute force they've been showing before. And do you, from your own estimation, do you think they were actually restraining and they did not really apply the force that they could? And is it premature to call the KDF on the ground?
Adibao, I think following the events of what happened, especially the storming of Parliament, it is something that has not happened in this country. Now, either we did not sufficiently anticipate the kind of pressure that was going to come from the ground, or we underestimated the challenge, that we faced yesterday. Mm-hmm. And either of those things could be true, because generally, we should have had sufficient force to be able to actually protect Parliament, at the very least. Now, it is also possible that when the police were available and had been stretched thin because they had to be deployed elsewhere. And so to the extent that that was happening, it put a huge dent on our viability as a sovereign country. Now, it is still within the president's, right to be able to call in the defense forces to support the police, but not to do the primary, play the primary role of law and order, because that is not what they're trained to do. With them, they're trained to defend the country against external aggression, and can only be called upon to support the mission of the police. Now, we don't have a shortage of police generally. What is likely happened is perhaps we did not anticipate, and therefore we did not prepare. Now, that also then speaks to our interpretation of what is happening in the country. I think it is time we started taking it a lot more seriously and have a discussion that can change the discourse, as well as now the kind of angst and sentiment that is emerging across the country. What happened yesterday, it was not just one institution. It was a number of institutions that actually represent what we call Kenya. And how we're going to prepare for this, it's not just going to be a function of a government alone. It's also going to involve other players, because these are children. This is very different from the process we've been seeing previously, which has largely focused, or rather been run along political or sometimes ethnic divide. This is something that cuts across. Now, last week, protests were largely peaceful. Yesterday's protests, while in some places were peaceful, clearly in some places they were not. We need to ask ourselves questions. What have we been doing that our young people no longer respect our institutions, that make us a country that is respected, that make us sovereign? What is it we've not been communicating that leads to this sense of hopelessness and desperation, to the extent that young people are willing literally to burn down their country? This is a serious matter, and while it's uncomfortable to talk about it, it's a conversation we need to have. We only have one country. There are about 20 million young people out here. Still, this movement is being run largely by young people. Unfortunately, you also have criminal activity that is going on that's actually threatening the viability of us as a state. Now, how do we deal with that without actually addressing some of these issues? What is it that is so important that we cannot be able to discuss around it? I think Kenya is a lot more important, and we should be willing to address all issues, even again, as we have to make sure we protect the institutions that make us a sovereign, independent country, because the moment we lose respect for all institutions becomes a problem. But this is also a message, I think, to our politicians. While the activities that took place yesterday, and especially the violent activities that led to the loss of lives and the desecration of our sacred institutions, for far too long also our politicians generally, all the way across the board, even to the county level, we've not been paying attention to what not just young people, what our citizens want. The truth is, young people are raising important issues of corruption, for instance, of opulence, that's beyond measure. It's absolutely ridiculous. Other countries in Africa look at us and they laugh at us, and even in the world. What message are we sending? And so there are certain genuine grievances that go beyond. I look at the finance bill as a culmination and a catalyst of, I think, long periods of frustration that we need to be able to address. And so if we look at it in isolation, I think we're going to be very simplistic. So we need to address a number of issues. And so this being a catalyst, because let's also be honest, there are a number of clauses that had already been removed from the finance bill. At some point, the finance bill, government will need, of course, money to run. And so it's not something that we say we're never going to have a finance bill. The government is going to need the money to be able to run its functions, including protecting those people who are protesting. But I think the question is, have we as grown-ups been so tone deaf to the cries of the ground that they become so desperate that no matter what we try to give them, it's just not sufficient for them? Now, if it's not sufficient and we've given them a lot, is it then a problem about communication? Are we communicating? Are we talking with them, or are we just talking at them? And today should be a moment of reflection an introspection with the way we've been dealing with each other in this country. To the extent that there is no identifiable leader of this movement actually makes it a lot more dangerous for us as a country. There is no one to negotiate with at this moment. They seem to be leaderless because they're spread all across the country. How can we be able to create a framework in which now we can start talking, but also we can communicate in ways that is going to give some hope, but also reduce tensions, and at the same time, move in the direction that we don't start harming each other? Because the way things stand right now, they think there's a lot of brinkmanship that is not exactly helpful. And so the common objectives of peace and stability may not be achieved unless we move into the middle ground. And until we get to that point, it's still going to be a challenge because no one knows, for instance, what's going to happen today or tomorrow. This is going to be a responsibility not just of the government. The government will have to talk to communities, have to talk to Kenyan citizens, have to speak, what's the role of the clergy, what's the role of the civil society. We only have one country after all. And while it may be exciting to undertake certain things, also perhaps, we may engage in brinkmanship to chest thumb when it comes to certain things. The truth is, countries are always one thing away from actually breaking apart. Mm-hmm. And January 6th in the United States, one of the world's oldest democracies, demonstrates or is evidence that you can lose what has taken you 200 years or 60 years for us to build in one day or in 1 week.
Mm-hmm. All right. Professor Peter Kagwanja, maybe your reaction also on the KDF issue as well, or we'll plumb deeper into it much later. But the point of conversation is here that a lot of issues that Dr. Kanenji is putting on the table has not been addressed. The employment that we saw, a melange of issues, that this is not just, finance bill is just epitomizing what is really underneath, that has been simmering and of course has been, blowing in embers, but now it's a full inferno as we can see it right now. But the question is, when this protest began, peacefully, did we miss a moment of negotiation? Though we were talking about a faceless movement, the statement that the president gave yesterday at night, should it have come at that particular time to address and arrest this when they knew as well that there will be a week-long protest beginning yesterday until Friday? Were they waiting for also the protest to begin so that we can have a statement? Should the president have stepped in officially, like he did yesterday, to address the nation and arrest the situation before it spilled out, to what it was yesterday?
I think we need to take a step back and make the statement that we have made before here, that this is a non-intellectual government. I don't want to say it's not a thinking government, but I think it's a government that is not driven by knowledge, but by the interest of the political business class. Because if they did, and if it was a thinking, a thought-led government, we would not be where we are. Because the Gen Z generation is perhaps Kenya's finest generation. This generation was weaned on literature that is our own, and that literally epitomized the do's and don'ts of our society. Mm-hmm. Remember, this is the generation that came to school when President Kibaki came to power. This is the time they were entering study one going on. And through that period, they were subjected, or they were tutored on literature written by our own authors mm-hmm. and liberators, mm-hmm. or heroes or warriors of the second liberation. And you look at Tumbo Lisilo-Shiba, Kirio Chahaki, Kigogo, and all that literature is written by our own, and it was meant to basically foundation our youth on fundamentals about our free nation. Now, that said, these are also a generation that grew up in some level of opulence, some level of freedom. Education is not paid for. In other words, this is a generation that has known good times. It is also a generation that has seen the deceleration of the country into bad times. Whether we are talking about COVID-19, the drought, the locusts, and the contested election, the road to 2022, they have seen their fathers and mothers able to feed them, and have also seen their mothers and fathers unable to support their families. And therefore, they have a very clear idea of what is not happening. 3, they have watched the government speak from both sides of the mouth. You're talking about shoestring budget, tightening our belts, and at the same time, you're doing things that do not represent a government that is serious in terms of running a shoestring budget of the post-COVID era. And therefore, I don't need to get the details of the things that have been said from the air miles of the leadership to the Harambee contributions that are all over the social media. The unimaginable figures that are being mentioned in Harambees associated with the close members of the system. And therefore, when these kids seek what instrument or weapons they can use to wage a war of justice in Lishiroshimba, Tubosi Lishiroshimba, and Kiriochahaki, they recourse to what they have as best as the generation, and that is digital warfare. And they've started waging digital warfare long before. This is not the time they are waging it. They have waged it for the last 5 or so years. They waged it against Uhuru Kenyatta, and they now intensified when there was no hope. They are this generation that did not vote, the 8 million or 7 million or so who did not vote in 2022. This is the generation, because they were now waging war online. They have decided to take the war to the street. So they are fighting on 2 fronts, the digital front and now the physical front. And that is why they are able to coordinate themselves, because they are leading, for the first time, we have an ideological movement in this country. Our politics has been void of ideology since the Mau Mau. But now we have an ideological movement. And this ideological movement is backed by digital capacity of this youth, which was born at the same time when Kenya went digital. And therefore, it is unique. And that's why the rest of us, the baby boomers, the X generation, and some millennials are sitting back and observing them. We are observing them because some of the skills they have, we don't have. And we are reading them avidly, watching their TikToks. We are not even sleeping. And we are wondering, how are they doing it in seconds and minutes? Because this is a special generation. It reminds you of the generation of 1940, who are the same age as them. General Kago, Marshall, Field Marshal Dedan Kimathi, and others, Mathenke. They were all in their 20s when they waged this war. And what has been the reaction of our system? The reaction of our system is very, very much like that of Marie Antoinette in the French Revolution. It is very, very similar to the British Prime Minister and the Queen Elizabeth's reaction to the Mau Mau. You start by creating ghosts of people invading you. Then you describe the victims in your own terms. If you read the literature of the response to the Mau Mau 1952, oh, this is an atavistic movement. Oh, these are infiltrated by some radical communists. Oh, these are all that kind of. If you look at why Jomo Kenyatta was jailed, he was jailed as a communist. But was Kenyatta ever a communist at any time? Look at the comments of the Soviets at that time. They're saying he's the most capitalist, you can't even turn him, change him. There's a record of the Soviets at that time. So President William Ruto and the elite around him have failed to see what the problems we have. And therefore they're acting on their own script. So like Louis XVI in the French Revolution, you call in the military. Now, you call in the military is trained to kill. It is not trained to negotiate. And the military will kill. And it will kill our children. They cannot negotiate because they don't have the iota of skills for negotiation, because that's not what they're trained to. We've trained our police to negotiate with our people. By the time you call the GSU, the paramilitary, you are saying this is beyond negotiation. And that is the farthest we can go in dealing with the civilians. You cannot call the military to deal with the civilians. One, have you defined the enemy? Who is the enemy in the civilian? Because the military is trained to deal with the friends and the enemies. So William Ruto has to define who the enemy is in this group. And I'm speaking as an intellectual and a military advisor. Finally, when you call in the military, it means that if the military is overwhelmed or refuse to kill its own, we have a Sri Lanka situation, we have a French situation, we have Philippines situation, right, that moved Marcos. And therefore,
even Sudan.
Or Sudan, or other countries. So what we're saying is, if we have a thinking government that put ideas ahead of their business interests, then we would have dealt with this situation very, very easily. Because the Gen Z is the best and the finest of our generation. And we have invested in them when we have resources. I can look at my daughters and my sons. They are better than me at their age. Why? Because we have invested and they have grown in an environment of freedom. They can reason better than us. Why are we not reasoning with them? Call out the military. Yes, there is a danger here. If tomorrow the Gen Z decide to go to State House, that's the end of the regime. So I can understand where President Ruto is in terms of the dilemmas of power. And the dilemmas of power here is, it is masses versus us. And the masses versus us is a situation that could have been diffused last night. What is so important about a bill when this country has thousands and thousands of bills that have been passed in the past? What's so important about the bill that we should sacrifice a country on the altar of a bill? It might be the best bill ordained by God and that we must do. But should we destroy our nation in the name of defending the bill? Why are we on an ego path rather than on a patriotic path?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
And I will wonder then, if we are talking of having a country devoid of, or a government devoid of tanks, we are expending almost 1.5 billion shillings paying these advisors. Then we should question the nature also of advice they're giving to the president at the end of the day. Why then do we have this eye-popping figure? And this is what people are raising questions about, you know, figures being thrown about because we have all these think tanks around, special advisors to the president. Then what nature of advisors is coming? Sorry?
You can call somebody an advisor. Is he advising? Or just having a salary? Then,
well, we need to question the budgetary allocation towards that.
The importance of this bill, it is not that important. And actually there is a way out. The president has a way out, a very simple way out. Since the parliament rubber stamped its way and passed it anyway, whether it's because they were bribed or because they believed in it, they passed it. Now, to save the country and to defuse the situation, first of all, tell the military to go back to the barracks. Let them stay there. Yeah. But he can refuse to assent to the bill.
Of which we suspect he will.
No, yeah, but we are now giving free advice if he can listen. He should not assent to that bill. He should return it with memoranda because there are defects in it. And once there are defects, you can say there are defects in this bill. So I return it with a memoranda, which will diffuse the temperature. A little bit, not everything, but it will diffuse the temperature. Having returned the bill, then of course you can ask Parliament to pass continuation. There's something I think they call continuation, so they can continue for about 3-4 months.
6 months.
Yeah, 6 months. Yeah, they can have that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a good strategy. Just ask Parliament to have a continuation, suspend the bill with some memoranda pointing out what's wrong with it, then get people to have time to discuss. Okay, the serious discussion, not this people beating up their like that fellow who said that the tax on bread was to reduce obesity. So he's kind of that. So having done that, he needs to reshuffle, reorganize the government.
Yeah.
Thorough reorganization, so that he creates confidence in the country. Right now, the public has no trust, no confidence in this government. In part because some of the ministers are incompetent, and he himself said that they were incompetent at one time. So why is he having incompetent people in key positions? So appear to do something, because he needs that image. He should be seen to do something positive, rather than just calling the military. In fact, calling the military is the best example you can have in this thing, because it shows that total breakdown, he has no power. The country has gone kaput. So if he refuses to assent to that bill and return it for relooking with memorandum, and then the Parliament passed the continuation bill, there is enough time to rethink. The other point is, right now, the part of the reason we have a crisis is that we have no IEBC, and it's not his fault alone. Because from the time the last, when it was disbanded, is almost 2 years or more. How a country can live without a key organ of state, of governance, of elections is ridiculous. And it's a very simple thing to do. As far as I'm concerned, it's very simple. You have people who create complications so that maybe they have something to do, some job or something. But this is a very simple thing to do. You just call all the parties, say, can we agree on how we do this thing? Leta watu, we agree. We have your IBC. Today, I think there are constituencies that are supposed to have by-elections, and they cannot be conducted because we don't have no what. Supposing the country comes into a position that we may have to have a general election, and there is no IBC, what are you going to do?
Well, but I think also with the issue of we have the IBC bill that is through in Parliament right now. I think in the third reading phase, there can be a special sitting for that as well.
It should have been the priority.
It can be steamrolled.
Yeah, okay, but do it. I mean, he should be seen to put effort for it to be done today, such that next week we have the IBC.
Right, but I want just to maybe latch on the issue of the KDF,
Yes.
if may well, please, because now that we have them deployed, what then? Does it mean that we cannot protest, or
No, we
Kenyans
can't.
cannot protest as
I mean,
it is?
it's really
That's
right.
what I'm asking. And if there is no point of negotiations,
I think the KBF, these are good people. They are good women and men and women of Kenya, and they are reasonable. I think don't tempt the military. They'll tell you themselves, don't tempt them. They are happy in the barracks, doing what they do. And if called to do some civil support, and they do even today, they have to build bridges, isn't it?
It is.
And they rescue people. They do that very well, and they're very happy. But don't tempt them to use the guns on their children. Because that's what this is. Because, as Peter was saying, who is the enemy here now? The children? So whoever advised the president to do that made a mistake. And the people, and that mistake does not mean that the people do not have a right to protest. They still have that right. It's there enshrined in the Constitution. And it's also natural right, not just the constitution. It's a natural right. When things are going wrong, you say things are going wrong. So the president will need to rethink and maybe consult a little more widely than his team. And that team has failed him in many ways. So he needs, and naturally his advisors are just not local but also international, because he has international advisors.
But when we're talking about that, it seems that will be an indictment to the National Security Council of this country, because I think that is the uppermost, upper reaches of government that we're talking to when it comes to security.
Yes, they are, I mean, these are good men and women, and they are Kenyans, for the most part, apart from the ones you don't know, the outsiders. That does not mean that they don't make mistakes. The fact that they are good Kenyans does not mean that they don't make. And the fact that they exist there does not mean that other Kenyans should not be thinking, because we have a team there. And what is going on right now, something is wrong. Now, we do not know what the National Security Council has advised the president. We don't know, because that's secret. But we know that things are not going right. That one we know. And because we know that as Kenyans we are entitled, we have a right to point out that something is wrong. And the president and his team need to rethink how they are dealing with the citizens. These grandchildren of Mau Mau, great-grandchildren of Mau Mau, you don't go there with guns to them. In fact, they're outthinking us, they're outdoing things, such that you need to find out how come they are better than our trained whatever. How come they are better? And if they are better, you cannot defeat them by using crude means, the old ways. So yes, we have a National Security Council, and it's good. And it comprises key officers of the state. The Minister of Defense, the Minister of this, the head of the IG, yes. But do they have a monopoly of knowledge and thinking? And some of them will tell you, part of the problem they have is that they are not getting enough outside advice, expertise. And see, if they are not thinking outside themselves, what do you expect? So the citizens are now expressing themselves, saying, look, something is wrong, can we do better than this? And as Kanedi was saying to you, you want to save the country, so involve everybody. And that's why we think that calling the military is wrong in principle, and intellectually it's uncalled for. And maybe part of the problem, you know, President Ruto has a small problem, not a very big one. It's a small problem. He does not like history.
Yep.
And therefore he fails to grasp the import of what's going on. Because if he paid a little attention to history, some of the things we've been saying for weeks and months are coming to reality. We have been saying these things. But when you ignore the fundamentals of life, you're in trouble. Yes.
All right. Let's hear from Kanenje. Maybe also it is bringing us to the point of an inflection in terms of a brand of politics that we've seen. This is a melange of youth who are coming to the fore from different tribes, different faith, religious persuasions and conventions, and they are holding one solid issue on the ground, which is the economy and the welfare and the dreams, and of course also the welfare of this country and the corruption. You know, things that we've been talking about for the longest time, but no one is really stepping up to the plate to try and challenge the government of the day. And from this point moving forward, because we've been talking about Mount Kenya politics, Tawe movement, and balkanizing, our ethnic fiefdoms, to preparing ourselves for the next general election, as it were. Come 2027, And if at all that we have our systems going, that no one will be denied any IDs, because we know how the systems work. Sometimes you can find, oh, the system is gummed, we cannot, the government printing machine is down for the longest time, we cannot print out IDs, oh, that one will affect, you know, there'll come all manner of stock of excuses being laid out, because there is this huge rising constituent of young people who now will be the voters who will decide. And it seems they are determined. They've said, this government, we don't want it. This government should be out at the end of the day. Come 2027, this has been their rallying call. What does it portend moving forward in changing the brand of our politics?
Ibal, you know, as rightly indicated, this has been a long time coming. Now, with regard to the events in the last two weeks or 1.5 weeks, the shock yesterday for some of us was not exactly what happened, was the fact that you know, we ignored the obvious of what was actually going to happen. By last week, a lot of us knew something like this was actually going to happen. Not because we were talking to every Gen Z or anything like that, but we pay attention to the way the world works and social movements and revolutions take place. And when you could see certain signs that something is inevitable, you know, we need to prepare for it better. Now, it's not about preparing on how to repress it, but how can we be able to counter that in ways that can actually even preempt it from happening in the first place. And that is, of course, what strategy should be. Second, this movement has taken the initiative. It is shaping the discourse and is pretty much writing the narrative. Now, that in an environment of a vacuum with regard to effective response in providing a counter-narrative to that and reclaiming the initiative, it leaves all of us, including government, really in a very helpless place. Why? Because then we're going to adopt more responsive and reactive measures as opposed to more proactive and preemptive measures to ensure that this does not happen, you know, to start with. With regard to the brand of politics, you know, politics remains politics. But this could also then be a wake-up call, though, that when there is a lot of noise coming from a certain corner for a very long time, that you need to check to see whether it's a cat or a dog, or is actually just a rat that is hiding in your house. And the reason is some of these things can easily get out of proportion or be blown out of proportion and get out of control in ways that we are unable to manage. Now, we are spending quite a bit of time discussing this. The group that is made up of the Gen Z is about 20 million Kenyans. That is a lot of human beings. Okay, it's a lot of human beings. Yet it's also a group that is jobless, by and large, is hopeless, and is a group that is extremely, you know, feels disenchanted with the status quo. I will call it is the Tawe movement writ large. Extreme dissatisfaction. And yet these still are our children. They're our grandchildren. So how are we going to deal with our children? Because this is a family affair. It's not coming from outside, it is internal. It is not based on political party or some, you know, ethnic, you know, kind of contestation. It is across the board. So as political leadership, then we need to rethink how are we going to be able to actually deal with this, not just to manage the immediate, but medium term as well as long term. How should we address the kind of challenges we face? 4 or 3, in the last several years, our political leaders across the board, across the spectrum, they've been very quick in making very unflattering statements and responses whenever there is a crisis or whenever they will want to pursue certain agenda, you know, whether in the position or otherwise. And it's only after the fact that we start actually taking back some of those statements. Those statements have cost us stability and peace before in this country. Those same statements have cost us even our diplomatic engagement in the region because of what politicians sometimes say, sometimes which is not even an official government position, but then they go out there and say something which costs us. And those same statements, again, served to fuel some of the sentiment and discontent that we saw grow among the youthful populations across the country. And so going forward, we have to change the discourse. What happened in Parliament? Every parliamentarian right now should actually be looking at himself in the mirror or herself in the mirror, is, for instance, what is it as parliamentarians that we've not been doing right? Because the truth is, outside, the desecration of our national institutions, a lot of our parliamentarians, based on what a lot of Kenyans and young people feel, they've not been extremely honorable in their actions. It's not just about the finance bill. It's across the board in terms of the way they live their life and what they do. And so what is so honorable that we can still be able to protect, because a lot of Kenyans are not seeing us that honorable, neither are they seeing Parliament as honorable, which across the world is a very honorable institution. Should we go back to the drawing board? As Kenyans ourselves, now we also have a responsibility, because if we're going to blame these parliamentarians and yet we are responsible for electing them in a culture that right now seems to give prominence to absolute mediocrity, stardom, and stuff like that over competence and meritocracy. And so when it gets to a point when you realize your representatives are inadequate, but then you also had a role in electing them, then you need to also ask yourself as a Kenyan, what type of people am I going to send out there to represent me? From the county level, because while this happened in Parliament, there are some county level institutions that were also destroyed. And yet, if we have to be honest, when it comes to the question of corruption, it's even worse at the county levels. Citizens just cannot access anything. People who are high school dropouts right now, they're millionaires at a county level. And yet these young people who've gone to school, they're educated, they are seeing this, and there is no hope for them. So as a country, we really need to do this. And finally, we've always said on this table that corruption, the kind of mediocrity that exists, is a national security threat to our republic. We've said that so many times. And so to the extent to which we are tone deaf to the cries of citizens when it comes to corrupt practices, when it comes to lack of service delivery, it is going to boil at a point where we cannot be able to put the genie back into the bottle. And I think we're moving in a direction that is actually very dangerous, and we need to take a step back and see how can we be able to move forward. We only have one country devout, and it's called Kenya.
All right. The question before we take a short break as well, as we're winding up on that, and of course we pick up also the latest development with the deployment of the Kenya Police, the rapid deployed units as well, and also the GSU to the country of Haiti, who have just landed this morning as well. We'll give you the details of this and what does it really portend moving forward. These are some of the rallying calls. People are saying, hey, we have our own issues here at home as far as banditry, cattle rustling is concerned. Can we tame it? But it seems that also went to deaf ears. They've gone full steam ahead. Questions were raised even when we had also the president in the US as well regarding this. And still, they're not rowing back, as it were. All right, those were the headlines, some that you've seen today. Day of infamy here, Kenya on fire, death, chaos, rage. This is some of the headlines that we do have this morning. We continue the conversation on the other side of the break, just moving on forward. And what does it really portend moving forward, as it were? Talk of the opulence, decadence. This was some of the things that were actually flaunted on social media. And people now have been so much angst